Welcome to Scaling for Success. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are interviewing somebody who I've known for a number of years, and I'm very excited to talk to you about because we work so well together, and it's really, really important. So, Barb, I know today we are going to talk about fractional work. I run a fractional COO firm. You do fractional PMing, project management, just to make sure that nobody goes, I don't know what PM is. But before we dive into our topic, I want you to introduce yourself to our wonderful viewers.
Susan, thanks. My name is Barbara Kebbart, but you can call me Barb. And my company's name is Projects Pivot. We're at projectspivot.com, and we take the chaos out of project management. There's a lot of executives out there who have a lot of projects on their plates, in particular, usually technical projects. They themselves may not understand how technical projects work, and we're here to take them off their plate. We do it in two ways. We do, like you mentioned, Susan, the topic of our conversation today is going to be fractional project services. So essentially, we take projects off executives' plates on a project by project basis. And we do this with what we call our chief project officers, which are the people who are experts in how to handle projects and the strategy behind projects, making sure essentially they're going in the right direction. So that's our offering one. And then our second one is we train and mentor, because there's a lot of people out there who don't quite know how to manage projects. So there might be people who have internal project folks that are just not as effective as they'd like them to be. So we get in there and help them. We have training modules that we do, as well as we do very practical project management training. And those are the two things that we do.
And I love it. And I know that you and I have worked on a number of different projects before, and it really is important, because if you don't understand the definitions of the words, if you don't communicate appropriately, if you're not on top of it, and on top of it means something different depending on the project itself, then the outcome of the project is usually less than what you were hoping it could possibly be when you started out. And at the senior level in organizations, it's really important to have those, hey, I'm calling out a red flag. Hey, something's off the rails. Hey, this is going great, and it's going to be ahead of schedule, which rarely happens, I know. But yes, so I love that we are talking about the fractional work today. And maybe we should start out with defining the word fractional, because it's been thrown around a lot. How do you define fractional work?
Yeah. Do you mind if I go back a step and define project versus operations first? Because
Please.
Just explaining the differences in the work we do. So the work you and I do together, in my opinion, is beautiful, because we really complement each other on identifying. And so when I mentioned earlier that within our offerings, we either have a project by project basis, and then we have practical project management training, two base offerings. But many people don't know what a project is and what is not. And the transition between the two is also very gray in my experience, and I know your experience because we've done this together. And so I just want to call out that everybody knows what the day-to-day operations of a business is. This is, the business development, this is getting payroll paid, these are all the day-to-day things we need to do to keep our business going. However, as we go through our day-to-day business, things pop up. And it might be that the accounting system needs to be upgraded. It might mean that something new that's bright and shiny that other companies have, we want too. And the problem with many of the executives out there is they don't understand that there's a project in there and that it has to be resourced accordingly. So the true definition of a project is it has a start date, it has an end date, it has some sort of a unique output, meaning that there's something new that the company is getting out of it, and that it's temporary. It's not going to last. And that said, that is going to have to go into the day-to-day operations of the business at one point, which that's what your company supports is on. So given that, the difference between project and operations, I now want to talk about fractional, the word fractional.
Before we go into that one, I'm going to stop you for a second, because I want to call out what you just did as one of the key things that I love. I love working with you on this, because you always take it that step back and go, okay, well, let's make sure we're all on the same page about the other thing first before the thing that you just asked about. And that can really be important in communication with a team. And yes, absolutely, a project has a start and an end and a specific outcome, and it has very different characteristics to what we do on the operation side. Please, now, fractional work. But
yeah,
yes,
fractional work. So fractional work is overused. I'll just admit that. You know, the word fractional, it's out there. It's a lot. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the way it is. I recently read an article about the rise in fractional executives post-pandemic. And this article actually spoke about how it was a good thing to have more fractional executives because of our work definitions have been a little more vague post-pandemic. We're trying to figure out different directions companies are going post-pandemic. And the need for fractional executives are more and more. Now, with the word fractional means that you're bringing someone in for a temporary basis. In our case, no surprise, projects are also temporary. That's why I was giving the definition earlier of a project. So to use one of your internal full-time resources, whether it's a project manager or even an executive for that matter, to be responsible for a project that's temporary doesn't always make the best financial sense. So it does make sense to bring in a fractional person. And in my case, fractional doesn't always mean executive. I know in sometimes other models, the fractional executive usually go together. In our case, we do have fractional executives, which are chief project officers. Those are the ones helping guide the strategy of not only the project, but the grouping of projects or portfolio within a company of their projects. But we also put somebody in on a project by project basis, which is fractional. So what this means is that they're coming in for a set period of time. In my case, a lot of times it's 6 to 9 months, sometimes up to a year, depending on the project size. Larger projects, of course, longer. But it's not always on a full-time basis. In fact, very rarely do they need someone to come in at a full-time basis. That takes the burden off of the people that are in your organization that are trying to get this project out the door. And so what I see more often than not is a project has been trying to get started for, let's say, a year or two, and they haven't been able to because it's sitting on the sides of someone's desk. Whether that's someone who's supposed to be executing the project, let's call them a project manager or a project lead, or the executive who needs to sign off to get the project out the door. So that's a definition of fractional in my space. And then I'm going to hold there because I want to talk a lot about communication, but we're going to get to that next because you brought it up and I want to talk more about it, but I want to kind of send it back to you about how that compares to your fractional work that you do within your company.
I love that because it's really different in some ways and the same in others. And so I do agree. There's been a lot of fractional people. I was just having a conversation with somebody before popping onto this call, and we were discussing a couple of different things. One is there's macro trends at play. So as people who are a little bit on the older side, the baby boomers, the Gen X's, they are retiring, but they're not looking to be retired. They're still wanting to be involved in different things and use their expertise. And so they're hanging up that shingle that says, I'm fractional, I'm part-time, I'm interim, etc. And the other one is that there are a number of companies that are downsizing because of different economic factors. They have to make light. And so as senior level executives, which is what I deal with, senior level executives are now available. Again, they're going, well, I don't necessarily want to go back into full corporate 100% of my time with one company. I want to be able to do this company and that company. And so I'm using the term fractional. Aside from the macro trends, there are some really great benefits that companies can have because now they don't have to bring somebody in full-time and pay them, for COOs, it's anywhere from a base of 30 to 50,000 a month in order to get the level of experience. Well, companies at smaller sizes don't have that capacity to do that at all. But if they access that person and that expertise for just a little bit of time every month, they can still move the ball forward, get the experience and that wisdom that comes with it without the big price tag. So there's a lot of benefit there. And then the other piece I wanted to add in was fractional versus interim. And so there's some interesting conversation. I was speaking last week with somebody about my own LinkedIn profile, and I'm a fractional COO. I've been a fractional COO for a number of years. I run a fractional COO firm. He's like, well, you might not want to use the word fractional anymore. Maybe you want to now try and test out the word interim. which to me does not mean the same thing as fractional. Fractional to me means part-time, interim means on a temporary basis, but could be up to full-time. So it's really interesting conversation when you talk to different people about fractional work, what it actually means to them.
Right. Do you mind if I comment on that wealth of experience of those that don't want to work full time anymore?
Please.
There is a huge potential there. I find, I'll just use myself as an example and on my company, our CPOs that we use, chief project officers on our side, it is so easy for us to come in and evaluate a project, like literally within an hour. And I knew I had the superpower actually quite a few years ago when I was still an employee working as a project manager. And I got called in by the director of the organization to sit on I'll call up my age, conference call, old-fashioned conference call, and just listen in because it was a project that was not going well. And she wanted me to just listen in and see. The meeting length was about half an hour. It was one of their kind of check-in / stand-up-y type meetings. Within the first 15 minutes, I had a whole page of notes written of what was going on with this project. And then when I found out how much money they had spent on this project, which at this point it was $1.2 million, I think, $1.1 million. And really, essentially, in my opinion, not much had been done. We were doing an interface across 2 large organizations. It was a technical project. We were building an interface. And so I waited to the end of the call. Of course, I didn't say anything to anybody on the call. I listened in. I brought my notes and also back then we sat down at the desk. It was an actual in-office situation, obviously pre-pandemic. And I said, this is what's happened. There's this and there's this and this. And I listed out all the different things. A lot of it was around communication. There was very unclear requirements. I knew some of the people that were building this interface. They were incredible subject matter experts, which is a whole other topic around getting the right people in the room at the right time. And I knew that they were struggling because of various unclear requirements on both sides of the organization. This was a high profile project. And so where I'm going with this is it only took someone like myself who had experience managing projects and messy projects and complex projects, a very short period of time to be able to say, wait a minute, we got to pause this project, even just temporarily. Let's recollect all of our requirements. Let's set up some communication, some understanding. Let's even bring the scope back a tad so that we can, I call it, slow down to move fast. So we can at least get something out. So both of these organizations are happy and see something moving. And let's start over again. And that's exactly what we did. Now, unfortunately, there was a project manager assigned to this project. They were more junior. They were also a little unclear as to how much to speak up and how much not to speak up. So the pairing of myself with this person ended up building up their confidence, ended up moving this project forward in the way that needed to be moved forward. So back to what you were talking about, of those people that are out there that don't want to work full time anymore, or they really want to bring their expertise to a wider variety of organizations. I know many people, especially like myself, we have a tendency to get bored staying in this industry over time. So we like to challenge ourselves. Those people can bring huge amount of value. And when you bring them with either the people you have within your company that are already doing something, there is such a beautiful pairing that can happen that really gets things done in a much quicker way than if you just let that person kind of flounder on their own for a while. And it's not that the people we have within your company are not doing their job. It's just they need the expertise of someone who's, I like to say, in the weeds of project management, or what my learning partner says, lost sleep over our projects. They may not have got to that level yet, or they're just starting to get to that level. Well, we have some tricks that we can bring and help forward. And I know the people that you work with, because I've worked with them, that you put into your clients, they have that ability as well.
I want to reiterate something that you just said, because it's a really important differentiator between people who tend to be in full time to an organization, and I want to call them lifers, comparatively to people who thrive and are great as fractionals, since that's the topic that we're at today. I found that for us, and you can tell me if it's the same for you, those who are amazing at being fractionals, they love to keep their fingers in a bunch of different pies, because it really feeds their thirst for knowledge and their desire to learn. And to say just to reiterate what you just said, absolutely, they bring that wealth and that depth of experience to the table that you don't get other places because they don't have the experience. When I was back in the pharmaceutical side of things and I was at one company for a long period of time, I have great experience in that environment, but being able to then translate that from point A to point B and use it in different models, the opportunities weren't there until I moved to other places, other industries, and go, oh yeah, I can see how A translates to B. And I would imagine that the same is true for your project managers and the chief people officers, not chief project officers. Sorry.
Although there is a chief people officer too, so yeah.
There is, but not to be confused, that's not what we're talking about today.
Right.
It's project office.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so do you find the same thing? Those who are really great, the experience, the depth comes with the ability to, in the past, have experienced a bunch of different places, different ways of doing things.
Yeah, and in fact, they usually have been turned away from companies because they have too much experience across different industries. I was once told, my background is a healthcare provider in medical technology. I did that for 20 years. And when I crossed over from nuclear medicine, which is where I started, into ultrasound, in particular, high-risk ultrasounds and various different things in the ultrasound space, somebody told me, you're not going to be able to excel. You're not going to be able to excel by you just need to do one thing. You just need to pick one thing. And I kind of walked away going, but I don't want to just pick one thing. I want to cover, because I'm all about experience, and my experience helps me grow and helps me identify when I go into the next experience, what could be made better. I'm a make better kind of person. That's why I'm a project manager. And so a lot of the people that come to me, whether there are fractional project professionals that go in to do the project, or even for that matter, the people who are already within a company managing a project, or our chief project officers, they come with a wealth of experience across many different industries. There's a myth within project management that you need to stay within the same industry. If that's the case, I would still be managing medical technology projects. I would be very, very good at them. However, only probably when they go super, super well. Because if I managed, and when I say this, I want to clarify, because I could get some project managers mad, is that it's the same type of project. So certain implementations, for example, or certain systems, I become really, really good at them. But when you throw something different at me, I may not be as good as I could be if I were managing different types of projects. And so this is what a company needs to look for when they're looking to do something new. If they're doing, things as normal, and you may want to, and there's a little controversy in this, but if you're doing something and it's a very specific niche area, yes, you do want to bring in someone who's done it multiple times, because they're going to be your area of expertise, or what we call the subject matter expert, or SME. However, when you're on the level of managing the project, or on your level of operationalizing the project, it's really, really good to have someone with a wealth of experience across different industries, because sometimes, especially when things don't go well, which it happens, that's why my company's name is Projects Pivot, because projects pivot all the time. It's really good to have that experience about, well, you know what, in the insurance industry, we tried this. Let's see if this could work over here. I know a lot of what I learned as a medical software project manager or project and support analyst is where I first started as an employee. I now carry into digital marketing projects or biotech projects, because a project is a project is a project. And so there's a lot of the commonalities that go wrong across all the different industries. So that was a bit of a long-winded response to say that it's really good to have experience in different areas instead of just staying within the same industry all the time. And I know this is a tad controversial, because there are really good people who have been doing the same thing. But for others like yourself and I and others that we work with, they like to have that breadth of knowledge across different areas.
They really do. And they find that it really serves them to keep them engaged. Right. We often talk as operators, the team that I run, we're not your forever people. We love the chaos. We like to go in, see the chaos, make the chaos go away, and then hand the business, which is now in a steady state and it's just moving along, and that's fine. And then we hand it off to those who will be better for steady state.
Yep.
Because that's not us. We love those chaos pieces.
Yeah, yeah. And I use the chaos word too. And interestingly, I had a potential client reach out to me a couple of years ago. And I talked with her on the phone and we had a whole initial conversation. And she said, I love what you're doing. This is all incredible. However, I should have told you in the beginning, we don't need you. And I said, why don't you need me? She goes, because we are, to use your word, in steady state right now. I actually hired you a couple of years ago. And so we're actually looking for more stable project management because we're now in this state that we can manage our projects quite effectively. And in fact, they were looking for more, I learned later, more of an account manager who is, onboarding clients or, like that whole piece. And she said, oh, this is an incredible business. We had someone very similar do this, where we had all of our project management processes set up about 5 years ago. And this has allowed us to scale beautifully over these past 5 years. And now we're expanding. So she said, no offense, I actually don't need you, but I'll refer you to others that do have problems setting up processes. And I also want to call out that the cross between operational and project, I love working with someone like you, Susan, because when it isn't a project and the company either has strong internal operational processes set up or in the process of setting them set up, and if they don't have that set up, they bring in someone like you to do it. We work hand in hand. So I know there's many times where we've been working in parallel with our clients to make sure. I'm like, well, wait a minute, this is more on the operational side. Susan, I'm gonna hand this over to you. Please let us know what you need from us. And then on the same side, you'll come to me and say, guess what? They have another new project. Can you set up? And so processes are processes across both project and operations. Everything we create when we either create a new project or we have something new, we have to create a process alongside it, which is a gap that also doesn't happen within companies. Is they start something new, which is a wonderful thing. It starts making the money, which is also a wonderful thing. And then they have to maybe shift it in a different direction and then or redo portions of it, and it hasn't been documented, or there's nothing in place to know how they did it, or somebody that did it before is no longer with the organization. Or that same person that did it is now wearing multiple hats doing something else. And they're like, I can't actually remember what we did. And I know that's an emphasis on both of our companies, is making sure that as we're creating whatever thing that needs to be created, we have processes that are alongside that. We are creating processes alongside it while we're doing it.
Well, and that's a great segue back into the communication side of things, because I know one of the challenges as you grow and scale a business, whether it be by design or whether it be accidentally, oh my gosh, we hit this really great nugget and
Right.
oh my gosh, things took off, is the communication silos. And how do you make sure that you communicate appropriately with all of the relevant stakeholders so that you understand exactly what needs to go into your process? Because that's a tough thing, that handoff can fall apart so quickly. It's really interesting.
Communication is, so I believe I'm an expert in stakeholder engagement. I've not only studied this for years and years and years, because I was a direct patient care provider, I would have to get information out of my patients many times in the middle of the night while they were in pain. And I had to help get a diagnosis, starting of a diagnosis, to give as much information as we could to the physician, who didn't always understand how much pain the patient was in because they always weren't in front of the patient. So over time, I found that my communication skills had to be more and more refined. And just like you noticed earlier, is that I always want to make sure that we have the right information at the table. So going backwards sometimes to be able to move forward. So let's clarify what this means. Let's clarify what that means. One thing I've heard about fractional, in particular fractional executives, and not necessarily fractional project by project professionals, but fractional on the executive level, is companies don't like bringing them in because they're worried about communication gaps. They're worried that that person, when they come in for short periods of time, let's say each week, they don't have the same communication. So that's a valid argument. It really is. Skilled fractional executives. So for anyone out there looking for fractional executives, make sure that you use a company that has expertise in closing those communication gaps in whatever it looks like. It might be using communication technology. It might be using some sort of regular touch bases. It might be using whatever the executive, or I should say the owner of the company or founder of the company or whatever level has brought us in, is their preferred method of communication in a way that there's back and forth. So it isn't just pushing one way and expecting that they're understanding you, but making sure there's two-way communication going back and forth. Once that is established, then those examples can then carry on to the team, because the main reason I find why people's projects fail is a lack of buy-in from the executives on the project. And that has nothing to do with the executive. In fact, it has a lot to do with the executive doesn't know what this project is about. And so they're like, why are we doing this? I don't understand. And that's a communication gap. Alongside communication, and then I'll pause in a minute because I know you want to say something, is trust. And so, and this is where what we call in our field stakeholder engagement. I teach courses on stakeholder engagement. I think it's a very, very important aspect of any business, but especially managing projects and operations, is the trust has to be built. And so once again, if people are out there looking for a fractional executive company, make sure it's with a company that you can see that there can be a trusting relationship built over time. Because without trust, we're here to make executives look good. That's what our job is. We're here to make the founders of companies look good, right? Of course, the side benefit is they make better, they make more money, they're able to scale, all of that, but we're also here. This is our job. This is why we're here. And so being able to have the best communication as possible in whatever form that looks like, as well as building that trust that says, okay, I'm going to hand this over to you. I'm going to go off and keep running the business. Let me know next week how that goes.
And that's totally what they want to do, right? I wanted to, you're so funny. You noticed that I was trying to, I was like, I got to stay on that one. So the other piece to this really comes down to in a post-pandemic world, and we deal with remote. I know, not everybody goes back to the office. There's hybrid pieces. That asynchronous method of communication, how do you make sure with all the different stakeholders that everybody gets their need met and totally understands? And when there's not, they understand how to escalate that and ask the curious questions so that they do understand, because they're not face to face. They're not, hey, I'm knocking on your office door, coming in and sitting down and going, I don't get that.
Hybrid workspaces. So I've been getting more and more of my clients doing some form of hybrid. And what that means is it could be as much as 2 days a week, 3 days a week. Sometimes I'm even hearing in office. Other times it's one day a month in office. Other times it's an event a year where they all pull them together a year, or even one client had every 2 years where they pull everybody together. Either way, it's that face-to-face, actually being able to connect with somebody. I know you and I worked together, I think, for 2 years before, or maybe a year and a half before we actually physically were in the same space. Yeah. And that was pre-pandemic. And so there's a lot of effectiveness we have within remote teams. However, there is this old school thought that there's not enough effectiveness that are in those teams. And so what is the best way for people to communicate across teams? I can't answer that question. I get many times asked, what is the best communication tool? Just as many times as I get asked, what's the best project management tool? And I never recommend a tool. I feel like we have to figure out what problem do we have. And with communication, we'll put aside project management tooling, put that aside. That's a whole other talk. But communication tooling, or I should say communication, the usual problem is we don't have a shared agreement on how we're going to communicate. So we don't have any norms set up. And just like all of us have different ways of communicating in our personal lives, many people really like using a certain communication tool over another, right? Like when I look at young adults, they may prefer the trend right now is Instagram over Facebook, those types of preferences. The same we have in business. And the common thing that I see, and I know you see this as well, is one department will be using one communication tool, another department will be using a different communication tool, and the executive in the room or the founder of the company or someone at a high level, someone, let's call them in the C-suite, so any of the CEOs, CFOs, whatever they actually don't have access to any of those tools. So they're being kept out of the loop. And even if they had access, would they go in and use them? They may have to have a different communication approach. And so a big emphasis on the work we do is establish a communication approach. And sometimes based on the size of the project, if it's a large project, we have to go right in and start on our communication plan. So we first figure out who's who are all the people that are in this project, who's involved, who are subject matter experts. We make sure we have that, and then we figure out what communication processes are currently in place. Then we have to figure out what are the executives' preferences of communications. And then we have to then go back to the team and say, okay, how can we all align for this particular project? It's not that we're going to go in and change the company and how they communicate overall. That's not our job, especially when we're coming in on a short-term temporary basis. However, for the purposes of our project, on our project side, we have to make sure that our communication approaches and our communication plan is set and everybody agrees on it. And when we agree on it and when we use it, it makes the actual execution of the project go seamlessly because we all know how to get in touch with each other.
I'd like to stack onto that one with two thoughts, and then please give me some feedback on that, on those two thoughts. The other elements to all of those, how do you communicate, what tool are you using, all of those pieces, I find is also an escalation. Yeah. So we will also teach things like, hey, if you've gone back and forth twice with the printed word and it's not working, use a voice note. Or I don't know, you could actually call the person. I know picking up the phone is a random thought these days, and it's not a first thing. However, that face-to-face communication or that verbal, they can hear the sound, maybe it's really important to them. And there's elements that really, oh, that clarifies that for me. Thank you. Because you need everybody to be on the same page, right? And so that's one, is really the escalation for the communication. The other one that I find is really important, and you do this beautifully, so I love this, is really the speed of access. And so in your communication plan, there's a way to make sure that you are able to locate the data and information that you're searching for easily. I've seen you do beautiful updates, and they're wonderful. They're one-liners. This person, there's a tag here, or you said, there's the tool that we're using for this project. Now the communication is all in this place. So you're not going, where was that doc or file, or did we do that? Because there's nothing more frustrating than spending 20 minutes trying to answer a simple question that should have taken 2 seconds.
And many times when you're trying to get that question answered, because I only report to somebody in the C-suite, so a CEO, CFO, COO, all of those, and they have, let's say, an investor that they're right in front of, or an important vendor, or of course, and a very important client, and they need just one thing. Let's say it's a number, a percentage, and they're like, where is that? And they need, and you don't want them to have to say, I'll get back to you on it. I mean, if they have to, they will, but you want them to be able to know where to go. Now, it's not that these executives are going to be in all of these piles of documentation, because sometimes some of these projects, especially the messy projects, they're scattered, as you know, everywhere. And it's our job in project management that's one of the very first things that our fractional folks do, is we start assembling where are all the pieces. Many times we find them on the CEO's desktop, not even on any shared drive anywhere, sitting on their desktop, and their desktop they're carrying home and back, and it's like, that's a danger to this project, a huge risk to this project. And so I want to comment on your escalation. Yes, when you establish some sort of communication norm, and I actually had an executive that I knew whenever he called me, which I think in the entire length of a 1.5-year project, it was twice, that something was up, because he never called me. I had a place that our daily communication would go. In his case, it was a different place than the rest of the team. He wanted it private. He wanted a place that he knew that whenever I put some information in there, he knew he had to check. I didn't have my communication to him scattered across 3 different tools, which is very annoying for people who are trying to run companies and they're trying to scale their company, to have crucial information scattered across 5 different tools, based on what their different departments use. So I also knew that he knew to go look every day to a certain place for messages from me or what I needed from him. As well as if the phone rang, I knew that something was up, and vice versa on him. When I called him, he knew that something was not right, because that's not our usual form. And so the escalation point Yet I've had other executives that do prefer phone calls. They prefer having, let's say, weekly phone calls, old-fashioned phone calls. That's a comfort for them. They want to hear a voice. They want to have that. Or the same with video calls. Yet I know other companies, and you and I had one before, that was a no video on policy. They actually had a policy that all of their calls were video calls, but videos were turned off. And they did that for the comfort of their employees, so they didn't have to do their hair and everything in the morning. And that also has some negative things that come with that. There's no ability to read body language. The majority of our communications is actually nonverbal. So we have to offset that by figuring it out. So back to what you were talking about on how to communicate, it's about clarity. And sometimes what we say doesn't come across, because remember, we have all different ways of taking in information, right? And so with a video off or a phone call, it may not work for some people. So we have to make sure that we layer on our communication in ways that everybody is going to understand. So that might mean that coming out of a very important meeting that is changing the direction of a project, let's say, we have to make sure that the information is as clearly communicated as possible. We all were in the meeting, we all heard it. However, now we have to put it in a form that everybody agrees on and is invited to contribute if the information that was shared is not correct, as well as very clear pointing in what direction things are if they need more information. So we want to make sure it's as clear and concise as possible, so everybody reads it and says, yes, that's what happened in our meeting. Yes, that's the direction we agreed that this project needs to be going. And if we need more information, we can dive in here.
And I love that, because you have the ability then to really call out those red flags. And it's so important to do that. Right? You can't just let it slide. Oh, it's okay. Because three steps down the road, that's where the break was.
Right.
And you've got to go back and you've got to have that conversation. It is interesting. So I love that. Now I know that we're talking about fractional work today, but those pieces about working asynchronously, remote, hybrid, all of those are new ways that people have had to adapt to work in a lot of cases. And they have provided some interesting challenges for individuals. So do you find then, is there a theme with the work that you do in terms of seeing more remote, seeing more hybrid, seeing more requests coming through for different skill sets that really are different now compared to where they were 10 years ago, pre-pandemic?
It's a really good question. I would say last year I saw more of a trend of the hybrid. So people wanting folks to be located in a certain geographic location to be able to come into their office as needed. I'm noticing though this year that has been changing. People have been settling with, because with the fractional pool that's out there are incredible people who are highly skilled with incredible knowledge to bring in different ways. Let's say it's a ERP implementation project, and you can pull someone even from Europe who has incredible expertise across multiple different projects, and they're not physically located in, let's say, a company in North America, but can bring so much knowledge to the project. And so now I'm noticing that people are saying, yeah, we still want to have someone in our geographic area. However, for certain aspects of our project, we're fine with wherever they are, because we need to. And so to me, that's kind of going back to the way it was in my early days of medical information technology. There were many people, and it was kind of not heard of back then, that were coming from certain areas or even across the world who were experts in a certain thing that we were doing. And they were being brought in on a remote basis. But it was a big deal back then, because they would emphasize to us employees, we were not allowed to work remote. But this person was being brought in for a certain area of expertise. So now moving that over to the fractional space, if a company has a certain aspect of something that they're doing within their company, and they find not only they can find someone with the right fit that's across the other side of a country or in a different country, and the personality matches, that's a bonus. They need to grab that person and have them help them get their work done. I also want to comment though about this around personalities. So the other important thing is with the fractional space, not only do we have to make sure that our personalities align, which can be tough, but we also have to make sure we're recognizing within the company the various wide range of personalities that are within the companies. We have some people that have different, and we could even call that styles and culture. There's a whole, once again, a whole other conversation that can go in with that. So when people are looking for fractional workers, whether they're fractional executives, fractional project professionals like what we have, CPOs, COOs, any of in that thing, make sure that they look at a personality fit, because even though this person is coming in on a limited basis, you still have to make sure that they get along, but also make sure that they get along with the people that are going to be working with them within the company, and understanding that we have certain personality types. I had a group recently, the entire team, a group of 7, they were all introverts. The entire team was introverts. And so when the CEO brought me on, they gave me a heads up that this entire team is introverts. And when I did some of my assessments with them, I was like, yes, indeed, they are all introverts. And so I had to make sure that I adjusted the work I did to base on working with an entire team of 7 that were introverts. And so making sure that not only the personality fits of who you're bringing in on the fractional side, but making sure that fractional person is understanding the personalities that the CEO knows very well of the personalities, or you could talk to their chief, their HR people, and they'd be able to tell you what the personalities are, and making sure that your fractional person is aligning with the personalities of the company, because that's going to help you, once again, back to your communication, back to your trust, back to all the things. It flows back and forth.
You know, it's really interesting that you bring that up, because we've been seeing a lot of people just hang out that fractional shingle, and they don't always have the depth of experience to truly back it up, unfortunately. And then in double-sided marketplaces that are out there for fractionals and for companies to find them, they put out a job posting, and I'm sure it happens on Indeed and other places as well, where they go, hey, I'm looking for this. And they get 200 people going, whoosh, I'm going to tell you how I'm perfect for that role. If they don't do the right setup for the role, then the company hires what they think is based on the skill set, but oftentimes there's a lot more to it that the senior level executive, the person with the depth of experience like you and I are talking about, they can come in and adapt what they need to because they've experienced it and they've seen it. They're not saying, hey, I'm perfect for everybody. So maybe they're not.
Many fractional people can be put in. So let's say a company wants to hire a full-time, let's say COO, or hire a full-time senior project manager, or hire a full-time project coordinator. A fractional person can come in and help you set that role up for success. So a fractional person could come and help you sort through. There may not be messiness in this one. It might be more unclear about what this person's supposed to do. I don't know how many times I've come in and they're like, we don't have a job description. We'll try and make one up for you, but we don't have a job description. And I'll tell them, actually, that's our job. That's our job to help you. If you're a believer in job descriptions, many people are also kind of not so sure about how the future of job descriptions, also a controversial topic. Sometimes they might do the 30, 60, 90-day plan, let's say, where they're like, this is what someone is expected to do within this first 30, 60, 90 days, or even a year plan, or even a 2-year plan. I see a little bit of a trend going in that direction as well. Because in particular in project management, our job descriptions have a tendency to say any other project duties as required, which turns into every project within the company. And so that's why most job descriptions don't always work for us, because we're essentially blanket. However, a fractional person, if you're thinking of hiring somebody full-time, great. But a fractional person can help you set that person up for success. Many people, I was in line for coffee a couple of weeks ago, and I was behind some construction people, and they had, I think they were somewhere higher up in the company, because they were talking about how the company was bringing in the 3rd project manager and the person wasn't working out. And in the it was a long line, so I heard a lot of conversation. And they were also talking about how they're going to, essentially, it sounded like, not help this 4th person who was coming in.
Oh,
because they were sick of having to onboard this new project manager who didn't work out. So they were like, oh my God, we're gonna have to take so much time out of our time. And they were, and I think they were maybe like, they had a lot of documents in their hands, let's say. So there was a lot, I could see that whatever project they were working on was a very extensive project and it was busy. And so they would have to take time away from them. Now, flip if that company had decided to bring in a fractional project manager instead, let's say, or even a chief project officer to figure out why they're losing so many project managers. That fractional person would set up that role for the future roles, not only for the person who's actually coming in later for that full-time role, but other full-time people that are coming in because they've worked out all the kinks. Many times it's an onboarding problem. Many times, I know you've seen this too, it takes weeks to onboard somebody. And that's a problem, right? And that's something that a fractional person does, saying, hey, I see you have an onboarding problem because I'm still trying to get access to certain technology that I've been waiting for, can I help you fix that? And so we immediately start with working that. As well as there's the offboarding. When you offboard a fractional person, there's an offboarding process that has to be created. Many companies don't have an onboarding and offboarding process. Even massive companies have problems with this. And so a fractional person can help pave the way for all your future permanent employees coming in after them.
It's so true. And that onboarding and offboarding is critical. Now, we are coming close to the end of our time today, so I can't dive into that. We wanted to talk about how fractionals also help in terms of different size of businesses. But we're going to have you come back in order to have those conversations.
We could do that. We could do that.
Because those are also critical. And then the other thought that crossed my mind while you were talking there was the piece that fractionals really do for putting those puzzle pieces together with different elements and job creep, because we often find the same thing. We come in, you've asked us to solve problem A, but problem A actually has a couple of root causes. So it's B, C, and D. And so, yes, we'll do this, but we need to do these other pieces over here as well. And then, oh my gosh, there's this red flag that we just discovered because we uncovered as we're going through our gap analysis and looking at it and going, oh, but the real thing, you think it's this? So as an example, 90% of people come to us and say, we need some processes. Out of those 90%, 86% actually have a people problem.
Yeah.
So I get it. Everybody thinks it's process, but oh no, wait, there's something over here. And you see that as well. But so just to wrap this up, because we're going to have a conversation again, let's make sure people can reach out to you. So I'm going to put some things in the description below. They're going to be links to your site. Last couple of minutes, I'm going to toss the ball to you. How do we make sure we get in touch with you? Anything that you want viewers to know, it's all yours.
Yeah, so you can find us at projectspivot.com. We're keeping that updated. We have lots of articles that we put out all the time around solving, like you're talking about, root cause problems, as well as a whole other topic too is how to not be a bottleneck, how to, effectively run your company and not be a bottleneck. And that's where many of us, I know I have that same issue in running my own company, where you can get in the way of what your folks are doing. And that's, something we always have to be aware of. So projectspivot.com, you can also email us at info@projectspivot.com. That's the way you get in touch with us. You can also find us on LinkedIn, either under me, Barbara Kebbart, or under Projects Pivot.
I love it. Barb, we are going to have a deeper conversation on a couple of other topics. Thank you so much for your time today.
All right. Thanks, Susan.